Big shout out to Squarespace for sponsoring today's video. If you want to get discounted prices on a new website like I did, then stick around till the end of the video. Thanks. This is a big day. It's a long process to be able to do one of these videos, mainly because it just takes a very long time to get these databases set up. And a huge thank you to I'm Satan Jr., whose name would suggest evil doing, but whose actual actions suggest great kindness and creativity. Nice. Links down in the description to check them out and what they do. They're very good, and they're one of the database workers that help this channel run smoothly and do tests like this one, where we are going to figure out, in unscientific but interesting terms, what the best attributes for goalkeepers are. Now, long ago, we devised the way to do this, where we take every attribute in the game, and with goalkeepers there's even more attributes. We're talking 47 different teams, and we take those goalkeepers and give all the goalkeepers on one team a 20 in one attribute, and they have a 10 in everything else. So reaction, reflex, timing, 20. They just have a 20 in that. Aerial reach, 20. Flair, 20. I think you get the idea. I'll try not to creep you out anymore. We run the simulation of this league, all these teams, 10 times. First season once to limit the impact of injuries and attribute development over time, and then we tabulate the results. The total cumulative points that each team with a goalkeeper that has a 20 and something and a 10 and everything else added up over those 10 seasons, and the goal difference added up over those 10 seasons to make sure that the points themselves aren't just misleading over particular dominance. And I have the results, and in typical fashion, we will start with the points. We will go through the top 5 attributes by total point total, give you the top 5, then pick out some other interesting ones that maybe didn't make the top 5 but were ones that you're particularly curious to know where they happen to end up in this, again, unscientific but interesting test that tells us some things, but we need to make sure we stay educated and not overvalue tremendously what we're seeing in this test, because unlike the data analysis that we did on player development, this does not have a statistical, analytical, scientific standard. And now that we have been able to do videos that have fancy data analysis reports coming out at the end of them, this jacked up way of figuring things out was something I came up with in a fever dream before this was my job, and something I still find interesting and love to do. So without further ado, the honorable mentions that are all within 5 total points over 10 seasons. I'm talking over 670 points acquired over those 10 seasons. These 3 honorable mentions are within 5 points of what finished 5th overall, and that would be communication, concentration. Is it really that windy? Seeing this? It is, apparently. Mother Nature just doesn't want you to know the truth. Communication, concentration, and acceleration are all within 5 points of the top 5, so I figured they were worth mentioning. There's a pretty steep 10-15 point cutoff after that point. And number 5 is tendency to punch, which qualifies as one of the most surprising results that we got out of this. Tendency to punch is not something you would immediately think of as having a strong influence. It's not something that I even reference as an attribute that's better to have it higher or lower. You got somebody that loves to try and catch the ball, somebody that loves to try and punch the ball. But out of 47 attributes, with a lot of random potential, tried to iron it out over those 10 simulations. Tendency to punch came away, or punching tendency, as it's, I guess say it right, came away at 679 total points over the course of 10 simulations. And this is backed up by the goal difference, where it came in 6th on the goal difference with 72, peaking at a plus 27 and bottoming out at a minus 16 in any one season. It did have a couple of absolutely terrible seasons, checked in at 50 points and 60 points and 64, but it also won a league with 88 points to its name and finished above 60 points with startling regularity, which is top third of the league. My best inference as to how this is relevant is because goalkeepers are prone to making mistakes on balls into the box for whatever reason in Football Manager 21, whether it be long throws or corners or what have you, and on tendency to punch, instead of actually corralling the ball, they just kind of get it out of danger more often. So it's just not a bad thing to have at 20. Which brings us to number 4, which is an attribute that has long dominated tests like this one that we have done, and that is strength. An attribute that I don't think a ton of people paid a lot of attention to before we started doing these simulations. But when you are significantly stronger than your opponent, it is something that is even more predominant than acceleration or pace when it comes to being good. Well, acceleration or pace are kind of codependent. You need a little bit of both for them to be effective. Strength is essentially a standalone attribute. And even on a goalkeeper, where you don't think of strength affecting anything too impressively, it's still the fourth best attribute at 685 points over the 5 simulations. It checks in at 5th in the goal difference with a plus 76 over the 10 simulations. It also produced a league-winning effort in Season 8, taking the crown with 87 points to its name, capable of actually winning an entire simulation. Turns out being strong is still good. To number 3. An attribute that has been included in my speculation about its relevance to goalkeepers in general, decision. Cheekily named AFC Decision in the game because blank FC just, it doesn't have the same panache. Decision was a clear cut above strength at 698 over the 10 simulations. That's 13 points higher, obviously within variation, but we also see decision come in a clear third when it comes to goal difference at plus 14, higher at plus 91 over the course of all of the simulations. It also tied for a league winning effort with 84 points in Season 6. The fact that it had the lowest peak of any of the 3 we've seen so far indicates more consistency over the course of the 10 simulations. And the fact that decision is a global attribute does apply to the decisions that goalkeepers are making on a time in and time out basis. It's something worth paying attention to. Then we journey to what is a clearer top 2 in terms of separation than what we saw from 4 and 5 and 6 and 7 and 8, which were all really tight, which is why we did some honorable mentions. The number 2 is a physical attribute that does not get a lot of love. It gets lost in the sauce when we do other tests like this and basically the middle part of the table because it's not great or bad. But when it comes to goalkeepers, it turns out being balanced at the point of attack is even more important than making the right decisions. It checks in at 706 points over the 10 simulations and also finishes second in goal difference at plus 109 clear of decision making and capable of peaking at a plus 28 in Season 9. This is balance in its moment in the sun. I suspect that when we do this for midfielders, there will also be a lot of love for balance that's not found in strikers particularly, which is the only position group we focused on with this sort of test so far, this being the first one we've done on FM21 at all. It took a while to get going. With the balance affecting your ability to not fall over, your ability to set yourself up to change directions quickly, these are 2 things that are incredibly valuable for a goalkeeper, more so than essentially any other position on the field except for those hinge type central midfielders. I mean, it's great for everybody, but it's not a make or break situation. 20 balance for a goalkeeper in this simulation was huge and led to a really impressive performance, but not nearly as impressive as our dominant top finisher, as we have seen in past simulations, especially when we were able to do the full attribute simulation where every position on the field had different attributes except for the goalkeepers, interestingly enough. We saw that those that changed the size of the player were really important, not tremendously important. No, strength was the dominant number 1 in those videos, but we saw good performances from things like jumping reach. While jumping reach clearly did not matter when it came to goalkeepers, aerial reach did. And dominant aerial reach was, well, the best. A 729 in points and a clearly dominant goal difference performance of plus 132, which is 32 points clear, 32 goals clear of second. Just a repeat offender at the top of the table with 84 and 91 points in its first 2 seasons. A low of 57 also clocked a 59, which is indicative of these types of tests. Sometimes you get going in the wrong direction, especially with just the goalkeepers affected in this test. There's a lot of opportunity for things to go wrong elsewhere, but the general overall trend of coming in very much above everything else means that if you end up with one of those goalkeepers that's 6'5", 6'6", or one of those goalkeepers that's 6'2", but really can elevate, has a 16, 17, 18 aerial reach, that is no small thing, and not just for any specific situation. That is an ability to cover area. What is important to keep in mind is that the players that are being competed against by those with dominant aerial reach are 10 at everything, which means we're talking about a significant 10 attribute point difference between the jumping reach and the strength of the players that these guys are going up against as goalkeepers and their aerial reach. So you don't expect in the type of real world settings you're going to be using aerial reach in, where maybe your keeper, if they're big, has 17, 18 aerial reach, and the players they're going against, if they're bigger strikers, I mean, sometimes they'll have even more than a 10-point advantage on the jumping reach of a shorter striker. Take Sergio Aguero, who's got under 10, I believe. But if you're talking about bigger forwards that have 13, 14, 15 jumping reach, maybe even more than that, the advantage for aerial reach is significantly different. But that doesn't devalue aerial reach. An aerial reach advantage for a goalkeeper is clearly a valuable asset no matter how big or small it is. It just might not be the most valuable asset when you're in a real world setting. It is also something that I just paid attention to not at all, really. I didn't pay attention to it much at all, much like the punching tendency and thinking about how that might just clear up dangerous situations. Aerial reach is now something that I will pay attention to with a sharper eye, which is essentially the point of these type of tests, is to show that if you are able to gain a clear aerial reach advantage against your opponents, it can make you better than any other goalkeeping attribute. Score 1 for the tall dudes and the balanced dudes, which are usually short. So there's you can go both ways. And that is your top 5 from our goalkeeper attribute simulation. But of course, there are a bunch of other attributes that you'd be interested to know where they end up. And of course, I am also interested to know where they end up. And the first one that comes to mind for me is agility, which you're like, Zealand talks about agility on stream all the time. I wasn't too far off. Agility came in literally at 9th, one past the honorable mention that we listed. So agility is still important for goalkeepers and aids their shot stopping more than another attribute that I have been a huge proponent of for a long time. And that attribute is reflexes. Turns out that when reflexes alone are all that a goalkeeper has, it's not relevant. Reflexes FC checked in at 41st out of 47 teams. And this includes benign attributes like finishing, which finished above reflexes, which means reflexes over this simulation was outdone by the statistical variability, because finishing obviously is going to have no effect. You're essentially playing against a team with all 10s. Reflexes being on 20 on the goalkeepers in that team fell inside the statistical variance of just an average control group team like finishing, which finished above it. One-on-ones was also one that performed tremendously poorly, obviously in a real-world setting where tweaking tactically and dealing with players that are more likely to create 1v1s like pacey players against high lines, it could be more relevant. But in a balanced, controlled setting where everybody's the same, one-on-ones were not that important, and clearly the game did not utilize that attribute a whole lot in real game situations unless they were specifically sought out. That's a pretty terrible performance at 45th. 551 points. Then there's those attributes that had been kind of debated in terms of their merit, things like positioning, which finished 23rd, which I don't know if there's too much that we can take away from that other than the fact that decision making is seems to be in a clearly advantageous position to positioning in terms of affecting goalkeepers. Eccentricity was not the worst and showed an incredible amount of variance, which is kind of hilarious, finishing at a high of 80 and a low of 41, which I guess sums up eccentricity, but it was right in the middle of the table and not relevant. Same with composure and technique, which finished 29 and 31st. Attributes that have been speculated as affecting goalkeepers overly. Kicking and first touch managed to make it inside the top 20 with distribution and the ability to control the ball, and bravery was top 15, actually checking in at 14th, which shows the importance of being able to control your box mentally. It's a little weird though, aggression down to 27th, so maybe having a little less effect on the goalkeeper than the bravery. The aggression willingness to kind of get stuck in more so than the bravery willingness to go into one of those challenges and into a crowd. There's handling, which is at 19th, which is a solid performance, but perhaps not near where certainly I expected it to be, checking at 639 points, which is clearly off of the real top group. The biggest takeaway here is a general guide in which way to lean, say, decisions over positioning when you end up in that type of position, or when you're trying to decide between two goalkeepers and you need something that's going to help nudge you in the direction to make the right decision. Because an exact takeaway is going to be harder from this test than any of the other positional group tests that we're going to do, because goalkeepers just influence the least amount, how do I word this? the fewest parts of the game. They are very prone to statistical anomaly, like we see long shots finishing 13th when we know for a fact that long shots is really not affecting the gameplay at all. Every manager in the simulation is the same, with the same attributes and the same preferred tactics, so there's no advantage being garnered there. This is all up to RNG looking for general trends, and that is what you need to take away. But now take it, run, value decision making, value strength. Don't overvalue the attributes like reflexes that I fell in love with at various points because it's part of the shot stopping arsenal, but so is balance, and so is agility, and so is that decision making. So stick to it. Maybe you like this test so much that you ran it a couple of 100 times. Then perhaps you want to put it up on a website. Maybe you could get that website from Squarespace. Squarespace gives people a powerful online platform from which they're able to create their website. And it's not just a pretty face. It gives you great analytics, like helping track your sources of visitors, the number of unique visitors, your page views over time, and different trends and different visits from different operating systems. You're able to get those numbers. It's that type of insight into your top traffic sources that can be so valuable. You have the ability to display social posts on your website. Like if I tweet something hilarious, which I do all the time, it'll go up on the Squarespace website that you have made. They also have this thing called Squarespace extensions, which allows you to activate kind of the e-commerce side of owning a website. You can promote products, but also the back end is nice. You're able to manage your bookkeeping more efficiently. It even helps you with your sale tax, and they can ship a bunch of things through the extension all around the world, which works for me because you're all around the world. You can get a free trial with your own Squarespace website by checking out the link in the description to get 10% off using the code that has to do with me, Zealand. Yeah. You know how it works. It's right down there, like top of the thing. You just click on it.